The weight of accusation. The morning sun fought to break through thick gray clouds over downtown Chicago, its muted light casting a soft glow over the marble facade of the James R. Thompson Center Courthouse. Its steel and glass structure stood like a modern colossus, cold and unfeeling, a monument to justice, or at least, to the illusion of it. Monica Barrett stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps, her black wool coat wrapped tightly around her, shielding her from both the chill and the stares of the early reporters who had staked their ground near the entrance. Her heart beat painfully against her ribcage, each breath sharp with tension. The heavy door in front of her wasn't just a door. It was the last barrier between her and the fight of her life. She wasn't just stepping into a courtroom. She was walking into a public crucifixion. "Ms. Barrett, any comment before today's hearing?" A reporter's voice sliced through the morning air. Monica lifted her chin. Her high cheekbones caught the light, and her natural curls framed a face worn thin by sleepless nights and relentless worry. She gave the briefest shake of her head and continued walking. A black woman in America, walking into a courtroom, already guilty in the eyes of half the world. Monica's heels echoed sharply against the marble floor as she passed the security checkpoint, her body tensing under the gaze of uniformed guards and curious onlookers. Her fingers curled around the strap of her leather purse, the worn edges a reminder of just how far she'd come. Once, that purse carried business cards, lipstick, and notes for presentations. Now, it carried court papers, stress medication, and a small notebook full of prayers. She built a career brick by brick, sacrificing weekends, personal time, and sleep to climb from a junior accountant to chief financial analyst at Roland Bryce Properties, one of the Midwest's most prominent real estate firms. Every audit, every late-night spreadsheet, every merger review had led her to an office with a view, and now, it was all slipping away, replaced with a courtroom seat. "Defendant Barrett." The voice came from behind her. Her attorney, Samuel Rhodes, approached, his salt and pepper hair freshly combed back, briefcase in hand. "We need to talk before we go in." They stepped into a side conference room, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and nerves. Samuel, a veteran attorney with a reputation for defending the wrongfully accused, set his briefcase down with a sigh. "Monica, we need to prepare for an ambush today." Monica's brows furrowed. "Ambush? From who?" Samuel leaned in, his voice low. "Elliot Rowland himself is going to testify." Monica's heart stuttered. "Rowland? He hasn't spoken to me directly in months." "He's been orchestrating this whole thing behind the scenes," Samuel said grimly. "He wants you to take the fall for the missing funds." Monica's breath hitched. Of course, Rowland, a billionaire developer whose name carried weight in every major real estate deal in the city, and who now saw Monica not as an employee, not even as a human being, but as a scapegoat. "They're going to paint you as a rogue employee," Samuel continued, "a woman with access and a chip on her shoulder, siphoning funds into fake accounts." Monica's stomach churned. "But the numbers, the fake accounts, I found those. I reported them." "They're going to twist that," Samuel said, his voice heavy with apology. "They'll say you found the discrepancies because you made them." Her hands clenched into fists. All the long hours, the loyalty, the trust, thrown back at her like shards of glass. "But why me?" Monica whispered. "There are at least 6 other people who had access." "Because," Samuel said, "you're the perfect storm. Ambitious, black, female, easy to frame, hard to defend." The courtroom was packed. Spectators filled every bench, reporters jostling for position in the back. The judge, a stern-faced woman with thin lips and steel-gray hair, presided over the chaos with a gavel that cracked through the room like a whip. "The people versus Monica Barrett," the clerk intoned, and the air seemed to tighten around Monica's throat. She sat at the defendant's table, her back straight, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Across from her, Elliot Rowland sat with his legal team, his tailored suit immaculate, his expression infuriatingly calm. His eyes, cold and calculating, flicked to her only once, like she was nothing more than a smudge on his perfectly polished world. The opening arguments were knives disguised as words. "Ladies and gentlemen," the prosecutor began, pacing slowly in front of the jury, "this case is not just about money. It's about betrayal. It's about an employee entrusted with the keys to the kingdom who chose to loot it instead." Monica sat still, every muscle clenched to keep from trembling. They called her trusted, but they never trusted her, not really. Trusted her to work twice as hard for half the recognition. Maybe. Trusted her to clean up messes quietly. But trust her with the benefit of the doubt? Never. When Samuel stood for her defense, his voice was steady, measured. "This is not a case of greed. This is a case of deception. And not by my client. By the very people accusing her." Rowland's smirk twitched, but he held his composure. For now. Witness after witness took the stand, each one a small betrayal. Coworkers she'd mentored, lunch companions who once laughed with her, all now parroting rehearsed lines that made her stomach twist. "She was always secretive," said one woman, a junior accountant who had often asked Monica for advice. "Stayed late, always closing her office door." Monica bit her tongue to keep from shouting. Staying late wasn't a crime. And closing her door, that was the only way she could work without someone hovering. Samuel's cross-examinations poked holes, but they weren't enough. Not yet. Then came Elliot Rowland. He took the stand with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. His tailored suit, his practiced smile, they were the armor of the untouchable. His voice was smooth, authoritative, the voice of a man used to being believed. "She was a rising star," he said, shaking his head with mock sadness. "It breaks my heart to be here today. But sometimes the people you trust the most, they betray you." The knife in Monica's back twisted. "And you had no idea funds were being diverted?" Samuel asked, his voice carefully neutral. "None," Rowland said, his gaze steady. "Until it was too late." The lies were smooth as silk. But just as Rowland finished, the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a force that rattled the hinges. Every head turned. Two men stepped inside, both in dark suits, both carrying an air of authority that sucked the air out of the room. One of them, tall and broad-shouldered, held up a badge. "Special Agent Michael Trent, FBI." The room froze. Even Rowland's mask slipped, just for a heartbeat. "We're here on official business," the agent continued, his gaze sweeping the room before landing directly on Elliot Rowland. "Mr. Rowland, we need to have a word with you." The silence was deafening. Monica's breath caught in her throat as Rowland's confident smirk twisted into something darker. Fear. The floor beneath her seemed to shift. The tides were turning, but at what cost? The storm had arrived. When silence screams louder than words, the courtroom sat in stunned silence, the only sound a faint rustling as reporters leaned in, pens poised, eyes wide, hungry for the next twist in the unfolding drama. Special Agent Michael Trent's badge gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights as he stood just inside the doorway. His partner, shorter, stockier, with a face like carved granite, flanking him. "Elliot Rowland," Agent Trent repeated, his voice calm but cutting through the silence like a blade. "We have some questions for you. Privately." Rowland's smirk had long vanished, his lips slightly parted as though searching for the right words to reclaim control. But there were no words strong enough to fight the weight of an FBI badge. The judge, clearly caught off guard, rapped her gavel sharply. "This is a court of law, gentlemen," she said, her voice cool but curious. "I would ask that any federal matters wait until—" "We're afraid this can't wait, Your Honor," Trent replied smoothly. His gaze never left Rowland. "This is part of an ongoing federal investigation, one that may directly impact these proceedings." The air thickened with tension. Monica's fingers gripped the edge of the defendant's table so tightly her knuckles turned white. Every muscle in her body was womb-tight, as though she were waiting for the snap of some invisible rope. Elliot slowly rose, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, the sound jarring in the hushed room. His lawyer leaned in, whispering furiously, but Rowland barely acknowledged him. For the first time, there was a flicker of something Monica had never seen in his eyes. Panic. Without a word, Rowland straightened his suit and walked toward the agents, his steps measured but stiff. The doors swung shut behind them with a dull thud, sealing him outside. Only then did the room exhale. The judge cleared her throat. "We'll recess for 30 minutes while counsel determines how to proceed." Monica could barely hear Samuel's reassurances beside her. Her mind was racing too fast, too loud. FBI. Federal investigation. Against Rowland. She was supposed to be the accused. But now, the truth, whatever it was clawing its way to the surface. The corridor of confessions. Samuel led Monica into a side hallway, his steps brisk but his expression unreadable. The press had been barred from the back corridors, but that didn't stop a few ambitious reporters from loitering near the exits, their eyes bright with suspicion and anticipation. Monica barely felt her own feet moving. What the hell was that? She whispered harshly as soon as they reached an alcove near a vending machine. "Something we didn't expect," Samuel said, his tone low but not quite surprised. "But maybe something we needed." "You knew," Monica accused, her voice trembling. "You knew they were investigating him." Samuel sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "I knew they were looking into something tied to Rowland. What I didn't know was how deep it went, or that they'd crash your trial to show their hand." Monica's breath caught in her throat. "Are they investigating me too?" "No." Samuel's gaze softened. "If they were, they wouldn't have announced themselves like that. They're after something bigger." Her stomach twisted. Something bigger. And yet, somehow, she was still the one on trial. When power crumbles, the 30-minute recess stretched into 2 hours. The judge, clearly frustrated, demanded updates every 20 minutes. Neither the prosecution nor Rowland's legal team had any clear answers. Monica sat in the quiet defense chamber, her foot tapping an uneven rhythm against the floor. Samuel was on the foam in the corner, his voice low and urgent. The stress was physically painful now, a dull ache radiating from her temples down to her shoulders. Then, the door creaked open. Agent Michael Trent stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Behind him, Rowland's absence loomed like a missing limb. "Ms. Barrett," Trent said with a nod. "May we have a word?" Samuel hung up and stepped between them. "Not without me present." "Of course," Trent said, gesturing to the table. "Please." Monica sat slowly, every nerve screaming for answers. Trent took the seat across from her, folding his hands neatly. "First, let me assure you that you are not under investigation," Trent said. "In fact, your financial reports flagged to Rowland's internal auditors are part of what triggered our initial inquiry." Monica's breath came out in a sharp exhale. "So this was never just about me?" "No," Trent confirmed. "But it was convenient for Rowland to make it seem that way." Monica's stomach turned. "What's he actually being investigated for?" Trent's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Tax evasion, wire fraud, money laundering, and the embezzlement you're accused of. That was orchestrated by him. You became a scapegoat the second you dug too deep." The room spun slightly, and Monica had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. All this time, she had suspected it. But hearing it, officially, was something else. "Why not stop this before it got this far?" she asked, her voice cracking. "We needed evidence," Trent said simply. "And honestly, you were building the case for us without even knowing it. Your reports, your emails, they created a paper trail we couldn't." The revelation hit like a blow. Her own integrity, her obsession with numbers adding up, had turned her into both a target and a tool. The other side of fear. "Does this mean I'm free?" she asked, hesitant hope blooming in her chest. "Not yet," Trent said, Rowland's team will fight. They'll claim this is a witch hunt, that it's unrelated to your case. You're still in front of a jury, and that jury still only sees what's been presented so far. Then why interrupt the trial? Samuel asked, arms crossed. Because Rowland panicked, Trent said with a faint smile. He made a call we intercepted. A call trying to move offshore assets before we could freeze them. Monica's hands shook. He's dangerous, isn't he? Trent met her gaze evenly. Extremely. Which is why you need to be careful. If he believes you're cooperating with us, or even if he thinks you're simply in the way, he won't hesitate to eliminate the problem. The words sat heavy in the air. Are you offering protection? Samuel asked. If she wants it, Trent said. But it'll mean working with us. Officially. Monica's pulse thundered in her ears. Cooperate with the FBI. Become part of taking down one of the most powerful men in Chicago. The fear was real, but beneath it, something else stirred. Rage. All these months of being humiliated, called a thief, dragged through the mud. All these nights when her son, Miles, asked if she was going to jail. I want him exposed, Monica said, her voice soft but fierce. Not just for me. For every woman like me who got used, discarded and blamed because they were easy targets. Trent's smile was faint but approving. Good. Then we'll be in touch. Storm on the horizon. The trial resumed after the delay, but the air in the courtroom had shifted. Rowland was gone, spirited away to a closed-door meeting with federal agents. His absence was a void no amount of legal posturing could fill. The prosecution stumbled. Their case, once airtight, was now full of holes they couldn't patch fast enough. And Monica sat taller, shoulders back, her voice steadier when she answered questions. For the first time, it wasn't just survival in her chest. It was purpose. But the storm wasn't over. Not yet. Because men like Rowland never went down quietly. And as Monica left the courthouse that evening, her phone buzzed with a blocked number. You think you've won. You don't know how deep this goes. Her breath caught. The storm was coming. But so was Monica Barrett. Shadows have names. The text message lingered on Monica's phone screen long after she'd read it, her thumb hovering over the delete button. You think you've won. You don't know how deep this goes. Each word was a needle, pricking her already frayed nerves. The letters felt sharp, deliberate. It wasn't just a threat. It was a reminder. Elliot Rowland was powerful, and even with the FBI circling, he wasn't done. Monica sat in her car outside the courthouse, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. The night's drizzle formed beads on the windshield, blurring the streetlights into hazy orbs. Her reflection stared back at her in the rearview mirror, tired, frightened, but unwilling to break. Her son's face flashed in her mind. Miles, with his gap-toothed smile and bright eyes, had been her anchor through every impossible storm. And now his safety hung in the balance too. The buzzing of her phone startled her out of her thoughts. A new text. Unknown number. You want to play with fire, Monica. Fine. But your boy might get burned. She dropped the phone as though it had scorched her fingers. Her breathing quickened, shallow and uneven. She couldn't lose it. Not now. Not with everything on the line. Grabbing her phone again, she scrolled through her contacts until she found Agent Michael Trent and hit dial. He answered on the second ring. Monica. They know about Miles. Her voice cracked. They're threatening my son. There was a sharp silence on the other end before Trent's voice hardened. I'll have a protective detail on him within the hour. This isn't just about me testifying anymore, Monica said, her knuckles white around the phone. This is about what happens after. They're not just trying to silence me. They want to break me. Trent's voice softened slightly. They want you scared. If you break now, they win. Monica stared out into the rain. They don't know me well enough. One step ahead of the rain. The next morning, Monica stood at Miles' school drop-off, her nerves stretched taut. The ordinary suburban chaos, buses unloading, parents herding children, felt surreal. She knelt down, straightening Miles' backpack straps, her hands lingering on his shoulders. "Are you okay, Mama?" Miles' voice was small, his brow furrowed. Monica swallowed the lump in her throat. "I'm okay, baby. You're going to have a great day, all right." He smiled, but his eyes didn't quite match. Children always sensed the truth adults try to hide. As Miles turned to run toward his friends, Monica spotted them. Two men in nondescript SUVs parked just down the street. They weren't obvious, but she knew who they were. Trent's team. Her protector's shadow was a comfort and a curse. A reminder that she and her son were in a game they never volunteered to play. Inside the lion's den, court resumed that morning with a strange emptiness. Elliot Rowland's chair was vacant, the legal team reduced to muttered huddles and darting glances. No one dared confirm the whispers, but everyone knew. Rowland had been escorted out by the FBI, and the walls around him were crumbling. Samuel leaned toward Monica at the defense table. "This changes everything," he murmured. "Without Rowland in the room, the prosecution's case loses its spine." Monica's throat was dry. "Do you think the jury's starting to see through it?" "They're human," Samuel said. "They know when someone's guilty even before the gavel says so." But Monica wasn't ready to believe that just yet. She'd seen too many people like Rowland slip through cracks built just for men like him. The prosecutor's case stumbled forward, but the absence of their star witness left their arguments hollow. They leaned on old evidence, fragments that had once painted Monica as the perfect villain. But without Rowland there to anchor the narrative, the story started to unravel. Then Samuel stood for the defense. "Your Honor," his voice carried weight, "we would like to call our final witness." The doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and in walked Thomas Grayson. The entire courtroom shifted. Grayson, a former senior financial officer at Rowland Bryce, had been a ghost in this case, someone Rowland's lawyers had worked tirelessly to keep off the witness stand. His departure from the company had been abrupt, shrouded in rumors. Now his presence was a wrecking ball aimed at the fragile lies the prosecution had spun. Grayson took the oath, his hand steady, but his jaw tense. His eyes flicked briefly to Monica before settling on Samuel. "Mr. Grayson," Samuel began, "can you describe your role at Rowland Bryce?" "I was the senior financial officer," Grayson said, his voice low but clear. "I oversaw internal audits and approved high-level financial transactions." "Did you work directly with Monica Barrett?" Grayson nodded. "I did. She reported financial anomalies to me shortly before her termination." "What kind of anomalies?" Grayson's gaze hardened. "Transfers to shell companies, companies with no physical presence, no employees. Monica flagged them as suspicious. I told her I would investigate." "And did you?" "Yes." A muscle in Grayson's jaw twitched. "That's when I was fired." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Samuel paced slowly. "You're saying you were dismissed for looking into the same irregularities Monica Barrett reported?" "Correct." "Who fired you?" Grayson hesitated for a heartbeat. "Elliot Rowland." The words hung heavy in the air. The edge of the blade. That night, Monica sat in her darkened living room, the only light the soft glow from her laptop. Her files, were spread across the screen, emails and reports she had saved before her arrest. With every line she reread, the picture grew clearer. This wasn't just embezzlement. This was empire building through theft, using fake projects, inflated budgets, and offshore accounts to siphon millions away while leaving Monica as the perfect fall girl. A knock at the door jolted her. She peered through the peephole. It was Trent. She opened the door, and the agent stepped in, his coat dripping from the rain. "We traced the texts," Trent said without preamble. "They came from a burner phone, but we caught the CCTV footage of the purchase." He set a photograph down on the coffee table. Monica's breath caught. It was Rowland's personal driver, a man she'd seen hundreds of times, but never spoken to directly. "He's not just a driver," Trent said grimly. "He's Rowland's fixer." Monica's throat tightened. "What does that mean?" It means if Roland wants something, or someone, to disappear, he handles it. A wave of cold washed over her. He threatened my son. And we're not taking that lightly, Trent assured her. We've already moved a protective detail closer to your building, and Miles' school has 2 plainclothes officers watching him. The weight was crushing. Monica sank onto the couch, her hands shaking. What do they want from me now? Roland's caught. Caught doesn't mean caged, Trent said quietly. People like him have layers of protection. Even if he goes down, the people who benefited from him, they're still out there. They're watching you. Monica's heart pounded in her ears. Why? Because you're not just a threat to Roland. Trent's gaze was heavy. You're a symbol now. You stood up. You exposed what was happening. That kind of courage terrifies people who build their wealth on silence. No more running. That night, Monica couldn't sleep. Every shadow, every creak in the apartment felt like a whisper of danger. But underneath the fear, there was something sharper. Fury. She thought of every woman who was asked to smile through their discomfort, to clean up someone else's mess, to take the blame for mistakes they didn't make. She thought of Miles, too young to understand why his mother had to fight so hard just to be believed. She wasn't going to break. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, as she stepped into the courthouse, the reporters swarmed again. This time, she stopped. Ms. Barrett, do you have any comment? She looked directly into the camera, her voice clear. I'm ready to tell the truth. The storm hadn't passed, but Monica Barrett had learned how to walk through rain. The stand where truth stands tall. The heavy oak door to the courtroom groaned as it swung open, but Monica Barrett walked through it without hesitation. The marble floors beneath her heels seemed to echo louder than the footsteps of every other person present. It wasn't just the sound, it was the weight. The weight of fighting for her career, her name, and her son's future. Reporters whispered and clutched their notebooks, pens dancing frantically across pages as Monica took her seat at the defense table. The absence of Elliot Roland, still in FBI custody, left a void in the prosecution's confidence that no amount of bluster could fill. But Monica knew better than to underestimate them. Powerful men like Roland had webs, deep, wide, and sticky, and she was still tangled in them. Samuel Rhodes leaned toward her, his voice soft but urgent. We're calling you to the stand today. Monica's fingers clenched around the edge of the table. I figured. You can do this, Samuel said. They'll try to shake you, but you have something they don't. The truth. The truth. It sounded so simple, but in Monica's world, truth had always come second to perception. And perception had been cruel. The judge entered, her gavel rapping sharply, and the murmurs died instantly. Let's proceed, Judge Conway announced, her no-nonsense tone cutting through the tension. Samuel stood. The defense calls Monica Barrett to the stand. A ripple of whispers swept through the room as Monica rose. She could feel dozens of eyes burning into her back. Reporters, jurors, strangers who had already decided her fate long before the first piece of evidence was shown. She took her seat in the witness box, the wood cold beneath her palms, as she placed her hands on her lap. The clerk approached, swearing her in, and her voice rang steady when she promised to tell the truth. The truth. It was time. Every scar has a story. Samuel stepped forward, his posture relaxed, but his eyes razor sharp. Ms. Barrett, he began, let's start at the beginning. How long did you work for Roland Bryce Properties? 12 years. Her voice was calm, but each word felt heavy, as though her throat fought to expel them. And in those 12 years, did you ever receive disciplinary action? No. Any accusations of theft, dishonesty, or financial misconduct? Never. Would you describe your work ethic for the jury? Monica's gaze flicked toward the jury box. Some faces were open, curious. Others were skeptical, arms crossed in silent judgment. Still, she answered, I worked late almost every night. I was the first to arrive, the last to leave. I believed if I worked hard enough, my work would speak for itself. And did it? For a while, Monica said softly, until I found something I wasn't supposed to. Samuel stepped closer. Tell the court. What did you find? Monica inhaled slowly. At first it was small inconsistencies, transactions for vendor payments that didn't match any approved projects, transfers from accounts that didn't align with real estate portfolios I managed. I dug deeper, and the more I found, the more I realized it wasn't sloppy bookkeeping. It was deliberate. In your professional opinion, who was responsible for those transactions? Elliot Rowland. There was a sharp rustle as reporters leaned forward, pens scratching furiously. How can you be sure? Monica's hands curled into fists. Because when I reported it to my immediate supervisor, they told me to forget about it. And when I pushed further, I was suddenly locked out of the systems I'd worked in for over a decade. And what happened after that? They escorted me out of the building, publicly, like a criminal. Monica paused, forcing herself not to choke on the memory. The sea of coworkers' faces, some shocked, some smug, as she was marched out in handcuffs. After that, she added quietly, they built a story that painted me as the mastermind, because they needed someone to blame. The enemy fights back. The prosecutor stood, a lean man with sharp eyes and a smirk that Monica knew had been practiced in a mirror. Ms. Barrett, he began, you claim you worked tirelessly for Roland Bryce. Is that correct? Yes. But you were also responsible for overseeing financial records, were you not? I was. And you had access to every account, every transfer, every document. Yes. The prosecutor's smile sharpened. That's a lot of power, isn't it? Power, Monica said evenly, without authority. The prosecutor's brow lifted. What does that mean? I had access, but no final approval. Every transaction required executive sign-off, including Elliot Rowland's. But you could have moved money, if you wanted to. Monica's jaw tightened. I could have. But I didn't. Objection. Asked and answered. Samuel cut in. Sustained, Judge Conway said. The prosecutor circled the stand like a shark scenting blood. You mentioned being locked out of the system. Isn't it possible you were locked out because you were under investigation for suspicious activity? No. Monica's voice didn't waver. I was locked out because I asked questions. The prosecutor's smile faltered for a heartbeat. And you have proof of that? I do. Samuel stepped forward, holding up a thick folder. With the court's permission, we'd like to enter internal emails, flagged reports, and system access logs into evidence. The prosecutor's smirk vanished completely. What they didn't know. Monica sat taller as Samuel laid the documents before the jury. These documents, Samuel said, show that Monica Barrett reported the very transactions she was accused of orchestrating. They also show a sudden removal of her credentials and access, not as a response to wrongdoing, but immediately after she reported irregularities to senior management. A projector flickered to life, and the jury was shown email after email. Monica's name attached to every single warning and inquiry, each time she raised the alarm. The response was the same, silence, followed by retaliation. Samuel turned back to Monica. Why did you keep copies of these emails? Because I knew, Monica said softly. I knew if they wanted me gone, they'd erase every trace of the truth. The power of the stand. The prosecutor tried to regain control. You're saying the entire executive team conspired against you. Not the entire team, Monica said. Just the ones protecting Roland. The prosecutor sneered. That sounds like paranoia. No, Monica said, her voice cutting through the room like glass. It sounds like experience. Her voice carried with it the weight of years of walking on tightropes, of being twice as good for half the recognition, of knowing her brilliance was tolerated, until it wasn't. The jury leaned in. Even the judge's expression softened slightly. Ms. Barrett, Samuel asked, if you could go back, would you have stayed silent? No. Why not? Monica's hands trembled slightly, but her voice was resolute. Because silence lets people like Elliot Rowland build empires on lies. And I won't let my son, or anyone else, grow up in a world where that's normal. The courtroom shifts. As she stepped down from the stand, Monica didn't feel light or victorious. The weight was still there, the danger still real. But the fear, that was quieter now. Because she hadn't just defended herself, she had exposed a system built to crush women like her. Outside the courthouse, a black SUV idled across the street. She knew they were watching. Maybe Rowland's people, maybe someone worse. But as Monica walked down those courthouse steps, her head held high. She knew one thing for certain. She wasn't just on trial. She was the storm. The Empire strikes back. The hallway outside the courtroom felt colder than it had that morning, though the temperature hadn't changed. The chill wasn't in the air. It was in Monica's bones. Her legs carried her forward, but her mind was still back on the witness stand, her own voice echoing in her ears. It sounds like experience. She told her truth, the kind of truth that rips away polished veneers and exposes the ugly machinery underneath. She should have felt relief, pride even. But instead, her stomach twisted with something darker. Because men like Elliot Rowland didn't just disappear into prison cells. They left wreckage behind. Monica. She flinched at the sound of Samuel's voice, then exhaled slowly, grounding herself. He jogged to catch up, his worn leather briefcase swinging at his side. "You did it," he said, his smile warm but tight with the weight of caution. "You held your own up there." "Doesn't feel like it." Her fingers dug into her purse strap. "It feels like we just painted a target on my back." Samuel's smile faded. "That target was there the second you found those accounts. All we did today was make it impossible for them to hide it." She didn't have time to respond before her phone buzzed in her pocket. The screen lit up with a familiar name. Agent Trent. She answered immediately. "Please tell me you have good news." Trent's voice was lower than usual, with a tone that made her stomach tighten. "Where are you right now?" "Leaving the courthouse," she said. "Why?" There was a pause, just long enough to send her mind racing. "We've got a problem," Trent said finally. "Rowland's team is already moving." "Moving how?" "We intercepted a message," Trent said, his voice clipped. "They're not just threatening you now. They've put out a contract." Monica's breath caught in her throat. "A contract?" "A hit," Trent said bluntly. "On you." The floor seemed to drop out from under her. The noise of the courthouse, the clicking heels, the murmured conversations, the banging doors, faded to static. "They want you silenced before you can testify again," Trent added. "We're pulling you into protective custody immediately." Monica shook her head, barely able to find her voice. "My son. He's already covered," Trent said quickly. "We've got agents at his school and your neighbor's house. No one's getting near him." Her free hand gripped the marble wall for support. How did it come to this?" "Rowland's not just trying to save himself," Trent said. "There's a whole network of people tied to him. Politicians, developers, overseas investors. All of them are at risk if you keep talking." Monica closed her eyes, forcing herself to stand tall. "Then I guess I keep talking." Shelter with no safety. They moved her that night, whisked out of her apartment through a back stairwell under cover of darkness. A blacked-out SUV carried her away from her neighborhood, her life, her son's empty room. The safe house was nothing like the movies. Just a plain rental house in a nondescript suburb, the kind of place where no one would look twice at a moving truck or a new face. But the silence inside was unbearable. Trent stood in the kitchen, unbuttoning his suit jacket and rolling up his sleeves. "You're safe here," he said, his tone gentle but firm. Monica stood by the window, staring at her own faint reflection. "You can't know that." "I can," Trent said, "because we're monitoring every call, every movement from Rowland's inner circle. And because you're not alone anymore." The words should have been comforting, but they weren't. For months, Monica had been her own shield, her own advocate, investigator, and defender. Now, relying on anyone, even the FBI, felt dangerous in itself. They won't stop, will they? She asked softly. Even if Roland goes down. Trent leaned against the counter, arms crossed. No, but they'll have fewer resources, fewer places to hide. Monica turned to face him, her fists clenched. Then what do? We fight smart, Trent said. We use everything you know. Every email, every financial record, every name. And we burn down the whole system. For the first time, Monica felt something other than fear. She felt rage. The spider's web. The next day, Monica sat in the safe house's small living room, a laptop open on the coffee table in front of her. Trent had connected her to a secure FBI server, a digital vault where they were building the case against Roland. But the deeper they dug, the more Monica realized this wasn't just about Roland. It was about power itself. Roland's network stretched into City Hall, state contracts, and even federal development grants. Shell companies were tied to campaign donations. Phony consulting firms funneled money into PACs. It wasn't just corruption, it was infrastructure. Every time Monica clicked a new file, a new name surfaced. Developers, bankers, law enforcement officials, people she had shaken hands with at corporate fundraisers, people who had smiled at her in elevators. They'd all known. See this? Trent leaned over her shoulder, pointing to a series of payments made through a Cayman Islands account. That's how Roland paid for the surveillance on you. Monica's stomach churned. He was watching me even before I found the discrepancies. Trent nodded grimly. You were flagged the moment you got promoted into the role where you could see the money trail. He was paranoid, but for good reason. Because Monica had seen it all. And now, everyone would. A mother's fury. Late that night, Monica sat cross-legged on the couch, her laptop balanced on her knees, her phone pressed to her ear. Miles' sleepy voice filled the line. Are you okay, Mom? I'm okay, baby, Monica said softly, her hand trembling slightly. Are you being good for Mrs. Grant? Yeah, Miles yawned. I miss you. Monica swallowed hard. I miss you too, sweetheart. But I'm doing this for us. So we can be safe. There was a pause, then a soft whisper. You're brave, Mom. Monica's breath caught, tears pricking her eyes. I love you so much, Miles. Love you too. When the call ended, Monica wiped her face, squared her shoulders, and opened a new file on her laptop. Project Phoenix, the FBI's internal code name for their investigation into Roland's empire. Monica wasn't just a witness anymore. She was the spark, the hit that missed. The next morning, Trent's phone rang while he and Monica reviewed more evidence. He answered, his expression instantly hardening. Understood. What is it? Monica asked. Roland's fixer was intercepted last night. Trent's jaw tightened. He was sitting outside your old building. We found 2 handguns and a silencer in his car. Monica's stomach flipped. He was going to. Yeah, Trent said. But we got him first. The relief was brief. Monica knew better than to think that meant the danger was gone. Roland had fixers everywhere. The courtroom reckoning. By the time Monica returned to court, she was no longer just a defendant. She was a survivor. The prosecution's case had collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. Every witness they'd called had been tainted by the FBI's mounting evidence. Every document they'd presented was now part of a broader federal indictment. And Elliot Roland, still nowhere to be seen. But his absence was louder than any defense Monica could have imagined. Samuel leaned close as the judge called for closing arguments. This is it, Monica. She took a slow, steady breath, her eyes scanning the packed courtroom. Let's finish this. The verdict of a lifetime. The hum inside the courtroom was different that morning. Thick with anticipation, hushed with uncertainty. Every seat was filled. Reporters perched on the edge of their benches, pens already poised for the historic conclusion of the state versus Monica Barrett. Monica stood outside the courtroom doors, her hands clasped tightly, her breath coming in short bursts, despite her best efforts to stay calm. It was strange how, after months of fighting, it all came down to this: a room, 12 strangers, and the weight of the truth she'd carried alone for so long. The courtroom wasn't just where her innocence would be decided. It was where she'd reclaim her name, her life, her future. "Are you ready?" Samuel Rhodes stood beside her, the trusted weight of his hand settling gently on her shoulder. Monica turned to face him. "I've been ready since the day they locked me out of my office." Samuel gave a small, proud smile. "Let's go clear your name. A jury watches everything." The jurors filed in, their expressions guarded but not indifferent. Monica had learned over the course of the trial to stop seeing them as faceless arbiters. They were people, some skeptical, some empathetic, some still unsure. The bailiff's voice rang out, and everyone rose as Judge Conway took her seat. "We are reconvening in the matter of the state of Illinois versus Monica Barrett," she announced, her voice measured and deliberate. "Are both sides ready for closing arguments?" The prosecutor rose first, his tailored suit still crisp, but there was no mistaking the slight dampness at his temples or the faint tremor in his hand as he placed his notes on the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice softening with artificial regret, "what we have here is a tragic story. A woman with access, opportunity, and ambition who couldn't resist the temptation." Monica's nails dug into her palm under the table, but she didn't flinch. She was entrusted with the company's most sensitive financial information, the prosecutor continued, and instead of safeguarding it, she exploited it, moving funds, covering her tracks, and only raising concerns after realizing her trail was too messy to hide. He smiled gently at the jury, like a parent explaining a lie to a child. "She's smart, smart enough to frame herself as the whistleblower when she knew the walls were closing in. But don't mistake intelligence for innocence." He rested his hands on the podium. "Justice isn't about sympathy. It's about facts. And the facts show Monica Barrett took advantage of her position for personal gain." Monica's jaw clenched, but she kept her face calm. Let him talk. Let him twist. Truth was coming. The prosecutor stepped back, his smile thin with forced confidence. "The state rests." The final word. Samuel rose, unbuttoning his jacket slowly as he walked toward the jury. He didn't need theatrics. Truth, when wielded right, was a blade sharp enough on its own. "Good morning," he began softly. "We've spent weeks together now, going through documents, listening to testimony, watching evidence unfold." He walked along the rail in front of the jury box, his voice steady, no louder than a conversation between friends. Some of that evidence was confusing. Some of it was clear. But I want you to ask yourselves, not just who had access, not just who had opportunity, but who had power. Samuel paused, letting the question settle into the room. "Monica Barrett was a trusted employee," he continued. "But trust is a funny thing in corporate America, isn't it? It's never real trust. It's borrowed, temporary, conditional." He turned back to the jury. Roland Bryce didn't trust Monica because of her integrity. They trusted her because she worked harder, longer, better than everyone else, and they knew they could discard her the moment she became inconvenient. Samuel's voice sharpened, the edge cutting through the hushed room. When she found evidence of embezzlement, evidence that pointed directly to the executive offices, she did what any ethical employee would do. She reported it. He picked up the printout of her flagged reports, holding them high. These documents, her own reports, were her death sentence. From the moment she raised the alarm, the story was written. She wasn't the hero. She was the scapegoat. Monica's chest rose and fell, her pulse pounding in her ears. "Ladies and gentlemen," Samuel said, his voice softening, "you've seen the truth. You've heard the FBI's findings. You've watched the prosecution's case crumble under the weight of reality. Monica Barrett isn't a thief. He turned to Monica, his eyes meeting hers. She's a survivor. Samuel stepped back, his hands clasped. The defense rests. The weight that breaks and builds. The jury disappeared into the deliberation room. Monica sat still, her hands folded in her lap, her mind racing even as her body tried to remain composed. Hours passed, a full day. Then the next morning. Each second was an eternity. Samuel brought her coffee, but she couldn't drink it. Trent checked in from time to time, assuring her that Roland's web was unraveling faster than even the FBI expected, that his offshore accounts were frozen, his allies abandoning him like rats off a sinking ship. But none of it would matter if 12 people couldn't see her truth. Finally, at noon on the second day, the bailiff appeared. The jury has reached a verdict. A breath before the fall. The courtroom was overflowing when Monica walked back in. Her legs trembled slightly, but she refused to sit until Samuel gently pulled her into her chair. The jury filed in, their faces impassive, their eyes downcast. Monica's stomach twisted into knots. Were they ashamed? Conflicted? Sure. The foreperson stood, holding a folded piece of paper. In the matter of the state of Illinois versus Monica Barrett, the foreperson read, "We, the jury, find the defendant." Monica's breath caught. Not guilty. The room erupted. Reporters shouted. Flashbulbs popped. Monica's world blurred. Not guilty. The words were too big to fit in her mind, too light to weigh down the fear that had lived in her chest for so long. Samuel squeezed her hand. You did it. She exhaled, the weight of the trial leaving her body like a scream that never left her throat. But the fight wasn't over. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted her name, but Monica barely heard them. Her phone buzzed in her purse. It was Trent. "You're clear, Monica," he said, "but you should know. Roland made bail." Her heart skipped. "He's running," Trent added. "We'll catch him. But be careful." Monica's jaw clenched, but this time, the fear wasn't alone. This time, there was fury. Purpose. "No," she said softly. "He should be careful." Legacy of a fighter. That night, Monica sat in her small living room, the soft glow of her laptop illuminating a fresh document. Title: The Price of Silence. How Power Corrupts in Corporate America. By Monica Barrett. She wasn't just going to walk away with her freedom. She was going to make sure every woman, every employee who was told to stay quiet, every worker who was silenced by power, knew they weren't alone. The storm hadn't broken her. It had made her. And now Monica Barrett was going to make sure her voice was the loudest in the room.